that some topics being discussed today may be potentially triggering and or activating for our audience members. So in consideration of that, we recognize that every individual's experience of healing is different. So we invite you to take care of yourself in any way that feels right for you throughout this presentation. We understand that a journey through healing looks different for everyone, and we are committed to creating a safe virtual space for all of our audience members. With this consideration, this session will touch on themes of gender-based violence, misogyny, racism, and racist violence. In our effort to support our audience members, we invite you to take a break, step back, and or turn your camera off at any point during today's presentation. We want to respect our audience members' healing, so please feel free to take a break, step away in order to take care of yourself. So now I have the honor of introducing our presenter for today. We are joined here today by Chikayla Barriner. Chikayla is a Westchester University alum with a BA in Political Science, working on her master's in higher education and student affairs. She's also a graduate assistant with Residence Life and Housing Services and an intern for the Dowdy Multicultural Center. So at this time, I'd like to hand over the session to our presenter.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I'm so excited to be giving this presentation today, looking to women in college debt. Let's get started. So this is my bio, just in case anyone missed it. But let's go to the next slide. So when people hear women in college debt, I'm sure a lot of different emotions come up because it's such a hot topic right now, because people are talking about eliminating college debt completely. And what does that mean? What would that mean moving forward? Is that a permanent change? So let me go back. I specifically wanted to talk about women in college debt, being as though women have acquired the maximum amount of debt amongst between all the genders, and women of color specifically have even more college debt. So college attendance is high. It's the highest it's ever been, but the cost of tuition hasn't declined. So you would think as college tuition went up, or the attendance went up, that tuition would go down. It's not the case. And as a result, college education rose to like 103% since 1987, while the median household income rate only increased by 14%. That's not a lot for decades. Women make up about 2/3 of the country's 1.4 trillion student debt, which translates to about 929 billion. So women graduating with their bachelor's degree owe about $2,700 more than men graduating with the same bachelor's degree. So just to put that in perspective, women who take out college loans owe more than males who borrow money for college. Due to the gender pay gap, it's even harder for women. So everyone knows that, or many people know that women do not receive the same pay after they graduate college, or if they don't go to college, and that results in them not being able to pay off their loans as easily as men are, or within the same time span. So if women are graduating from college and they want to get ahead, they often tend to say, okay, I'm gonna go back and get my master's degree, or I'm gonna get my doctoral degree. So it makes them stand out and more competitive in the job market. But in doing that, they end up getting into even more debt. So while they're trying to get ahead, it's just like, you just can't win, just keep going back into more debt. And then women in marginalized communities owe more than white men and women. So just to put this in context, for the mean total borrowed by gender, race, or ethnicity, white women owe about $31,346. Hispanic or Latinx women owe about $27,029. And then Asian women owe about $25,252, compared to Black women who owe the most at $37,558. So huge disproportion right there. So the impacts that women having college debt is that it prevents them from reaching their goals. So say someone, I'll just use myself for example, during my undergraduate experience, I got a BA in political science. If I wanted to go out into the job market, if I wanted to work in a government office, what's going to make me stand out more than someone I'm competing with is my experience. Just being a female and just only having my BA is not going to make me stand out so much. So I have to go and get my master's degree, or maybe I go back to law school and get my law degree. In doing that, I would have to take out loans, right? Because I'm not in a position to pay for that out of pocket. And nor is my family. I can't rely on my family to do that. So a lot of women are in the same position where they want to go above and beyond to compete and essentially get the jobs that they really want and always dreamed about, and those high paying jobs. But in doing that, they just keep setting themselves back because, you know, they're not financially stable, not in a financial position to just be able to pay off out of pocket. So women also have a harder time because women want to start a family. Some women start having kids at a younger age. And then not only are they looking out for themselves in paying their college tuition, but they also have to look out for their younger ones. And that's a price for childcare, for food for their child, to put a roof over their head. So all of these expenses just keep trickling up. Meanwhile, the debt still keeps rolling in. The government still wants to get their money back, and it just doesn't stop. Okay, here is a chart from the AAUW that gives an example. So here is a sample of what a monthly budget will look like for a woman out of college. So here you see the expenses for food would be about $387. Vehicle loan or lease will be about $396. You have housing, you have remaining funds, you have student loan payments, medical expenses, and utilities. So all of that leaves the woman with $148 each month for other expenses. This is before even including childcare costs. So if a woman has one child, let alone more than that, then they really have less money to spend on other things that they're interested in and take care of their families, plus the debt. They still have to pay that debt back. And just to put it in perspective so you can get an example of what that looks like on a monthly budget basis. Okay, here's a video from the NAACP. This video occurred earlier this month, so it's really fresh and new. And it's different representatives, primarily African-American representatives, that talk about their experience with college debt. And I thought it was really important to hear testimonies from people that actually are going through having to pay their debt back.
Thank you so much. And Council Member Brooks, I want to give you an opportunity to also respond. Was higher education possible for you without having to take out student loans? And what would $50,000 in forgiveness mean for you and your constituents?
Here for a fellow sister who has, who's had this debt, alleviated. And so as we continue these conversations and continue to have, the push for this, I'm there for it. I'm there for all of the victories for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Council Member Brooks, I want to give you an opportunity to also respond. Was higher education possible for you without having to take out student loans? And what would $50,000 in forgiveness mean for you and your constituents?
Well, the first answer is absolutely not. I graduated from high school 7 months pregnant with my first daughter and still refusing to be a statistic and to disappoint my parents even further. I had no choice but to go to college, right? But who's going to pay for it? And my story is not strange to or foreign to a lot of folks, So no, without student loans, I wouldn't have been able to make it through college at all. And then in order to sustain this career that I built once I got my degree, in the corporate world with, our counterparts I went back and got another degree, which put me further in debt. And by this time, I think I had 3 kids and 1 on the way, right? So not at all. This would not have been possible. And at this point, I've been through it all. Forbearance, the garnishment of the wages. My first job, I made $30,000 a year out of college. I stayed at that job for 17 years. $30,000 with a family goes nowhere. The realization that when I couldn't pay my student debt and I got backed up, then I got garnished. So when you get the garnishment, that means they take your money before you get it, which put my family deeper in a financial hole, because then I have to take on a second job. And I feel it's important that we tell these stories because they have put us in the method of shame. People don't talk about it, but I wasn't the only one being garnished because my girlfriend worked in human resources, right? And the reality is that $50,000 back then would have been huge because it would have relieved most of my student loan debt. At this point, it would still relieve most of it at this point. But back then, it would have given me freedom. It would have allowed me to take care of my family without struggling. Because part of that student loan debt, did I end up losing my house? Because my wages were garnished, trying to juggle kids in daycare. And, it's important that we tell these real stories because being strong, Black women, has a household, you did the thing, you the first one in your family to go to college, like you big time, right? And reality, you're struggling to make ends meet every day. The saying, faking it till you're making it, when you had to do that for so many years. And there's shame about it. When I have, other folks I know that made different decisions that were still bringing home more money than I was. So I think it's important that so I'm so happy to be on this panel with my sisters. Like, we have to tell our stories. Nobody's story is the same, but I'm pretty sure you knew somebody that's been in this situation before, right? And we also have to eliminate this for, the next generation of young women, because someone on this panel right now is being garnished, right? Someone not on this panel, but in the background of this call. Someone else understands exactly what it means when you're making a decision between paying your mortgage after they garnish most of your check for a student loan, right? And $50,000 would be a huge relief, but I want them to erase it all. Like, if you're going to give Black women real freedom, the same way we got Biden in the office, he needs to release this debt. Like, give them the opportunity to have a fresh new start. It's possible.
Thank you so much. I was going to say, again, I really just wanted to emphasize the video because this is a woman who's been to college not only for her bachelor's degree, but she went back for her master's just to get ahead. Just to support her family, to get a job that would be well paying. But as you heard, she still had to face college debt with the government garnishing the money from her paychecks. Before she would even be able to pay her mortgage, it would come straight from her check, the balance that she has for her student loans. So it's really challenging. And when you have a perspective of what that looks like in terms of a family or individual in their individual lives, it really makes you see the importance of, or the significance rather, that student debt has on people, and particularly women, because women have more than men. So for the discussion questions, here were some different questions I wanted to go over with you all. So what were your thoughts on the video?
I thought personally that the video was very insightful to hear somebody's personal experience with this, because not only is college as a woman of color hard to even get into, hearing her situation, even just getting into college, but also once you're graduated, it's like, the barriers don't stop, the issues don't stop. And so it was very just insightful to hear somebody's own personal experience of how student loan debt is affecting them.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. I agree completely. Any other thoughts on the video? Okay, the next question is, how do you think the college student debt issue can be resolved to be more equal regardless of gender? Any thoughts on that question? I know most people just would say, hey, just eliminate all college debt. that's the end all be all. Just have it wiped away completely. Is that something that you all would agree to do? No, for me personally, I would vote yes to get rid of college debt, just because it gives you more opportunities financially to achieve your goals. In your opinion, who controls student debt? So we always talk about like student debt and having to pay, but who do you think is responsible for the student debt that everyone has? Like, who do you think is that point person, if there's a point person, or do you think it's a committee of people?
I think it's a lot of institutions. I think it's kind of like a business now. Everyone just is looking for money. And so I think a lot of these institutions, as well as, President Biden, his failure to really address this issue at all. And what he has done so far is very minimal and has helped very few people. So I think it's so many people who are contributing to this issue.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I know a lot of people have been really pushing for Biden to get rid of the college debt, even if it's not all of it, just to get rid of a good portion of it, right? And it wouldn't take a whole bunch for him to be able to do that. And so everyone feel that now is the time to urge him to do so. And hopefully so, while we're still in college as well, because this would definitely benefit us. But one thing to consider too is that this is a historic thing. At one point, college was free, or college was more affordable for students. And then there was a point in the 1980s during the Reagan era where students were protesting, primarily marginalized communities and people of color, about the education status at the time. It was not equal, it was not equitable for all people. As a result, Reagan privatized education, privatized higher education, which basically meant that there would be less government funds, and it would make it harder for marginalized communities and people of color to get an education. It brought about that patriarchal system where it made education seem more of a privilege rather than something that everybody could obtain equally. So when you think about who controls student debt, it really goes back historically to that, because at one point, education was something that was supposed to be accessible for all people. And that definitely changed throughout the years, and more people are having to pay this huge amount of debt, and it just continues to put them back from their goals. Like if you want to get a house after college, you still have to consider your debt. Or if you want to get a car, you have to consider your debt. If you want to move, anything you want to do, anything you want to buy that's a large ticket item, but is beneficial for you and may even be a necessity, you still have to reflect and think on that debt. It's just one of those things that just is like a heavy weight or heavy load that's just on your back. It just doesn't go away. But maybe, hopefully, in the near future, it will. Fingers crossed that Biden passes that for everybody. So here are some policy recommendations. So one is to protect and expand the Pell Grants for low-income students to reduce the amount of student loans that they have to take on completion of a degree. Another one is to increase funding for public colleges and universities and support efforts to move toward tuition and debt-free options for students. Another is to make it easier for students to enroll in income-driven repayment options. In addition, student loan borrowers should have protections from abusive and fraudulent practices by schools, lenders, and loan servicers. Address both the academic and overall financial needs of students, such as access to childcare and other non-tuition expenses. That's a really big one, because even in grad school, if you get an assistantship, you still have to pay for those expenses, whether it be for travel, whether it be out of state expenses. I think sometimes in the fine print, people don't realize that when they sign up for an assistantship that generally pays for your tuition, but those expenses definitely go up and they can rise and just be something that people don't think of when they sign off for those assistantships. But and the last one is for employers to provide employee matches and other forms of support for student loan debt repayment. But I think the most popular choice is to just get rid of the student debt and make college free for all people. All right, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for attending. Are there any questions?
Feel free to use the Q&A function or unmute. I do have a few questions myself. So what would you say to those people who believe that college shouldn't be free because then there wouldn't be any jobs and our degrees would be worthless? No, we've been hearing a lot of debates about student debt cancellation. So what would you say to those people who constantly say this?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it comes up so often. Actually, researchers have found that it would have the opposite effect, that by more people having an education, having access to education and not having to pay that debt, people have more opportunity to spend money in other areas. So where you find that it's this debt that people also don't always pay off their debt. So it's just something that's on like their financial record, but it's not something that the government is necessarily getting all the time either. But with people having equal access to education and not having to pay off that debt, it opens up the market for people to buy other things that they want to get, like housing. Right now, currently, because of the financial crisis that's occurring, people aren't buying houses as often because the prices are ridiculous right now, and people aren't spending money on cars as frequently. If people were alleviated that debt, they'll be able to spend more money for other things that would keep and regulate the market, the economy rather.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree. And how would you say that COVID has impacted this struggle with student loan debt? Because now we have a whole pandemic and that has caused a lot of burden on people. So how would you say that this has affected student loan debt for women specifically?
Ooh, I feel like that's a very complicated answer just because people have made a lot of different decisions since COVID in their education. So you have some people that decided to hold off on getting their education. And as a result of them not getting their education, they're forced into working, but it's not where they want to be. They're not working the jobs that they would have with a college education. And that lends itself in a whole nother hemisphere. But for those that are going to college, they still have to pay and take out loans for college debt or that result in college debt. And it's just something that keeps occurring. It's just something like every year, even with the FAFSA, they will still have debt because the government isn't giving more money necessarily for a college education. They're not lowering tuition. They'll say it stays the same, but then you have these fees that just keep going up. So on the one hand, they make it seem as though, college tuition isn't terrible right now because the tuition hasn't went up, but you have these expenses that have, and as a result, more women specifically have to take out those loans to pay for those expenses. So it's a lot of kind of like backdoor language when it comes to this, because they'll present it, or universities specifically will present it in a way that makes it seem like, during COVID, it was easier to get an education, when that's just really not true, because you still have to pay for your college tuition and it hasn't decreased any. And you would think so, possibly when it was everyone was quarantining because it was via Zoom. But in some cases, those prices have went up because they also put a technology price over it, even though people use the Wi-Fi from wherever they were located. So it's a very interesting time during COVID, and how they like to talk about the tuition prices and how that affects women um, with their debt? Great questions.
There is a question in the chat. I will read it out loud. For folks who are working on repayment of their student debt, repayment has been on pause since March 2020. We know that women and LGBTQIA folks are most vulnerable to financial hardship when repayment begin. How do you view this pause in repayment? Do you think this is evidence for cancellation of student debt?
I think it really shows that how significant it is. I think it shows that with it being on pause, that's not a solution overall. It helps in the moment, but at some point, it's basically saying that the money will need to be paid back. And because, wages haven't necessarily went up a ton, household income hasn't went up a ton, people are still going to be in a financial struggle to pay this debt. So even when it's taken off pause, it's going to be hard to pay that money. So I think that in situations like this, when it's presented to President Biden and the government in general about alleviating debt, it should be an eye opener. But the other part is the government, the government is also looking out for the government. While we want to elect people that represent us in our struggle, we already know that that's not always what is the result, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it was, honestly. So I think we should use examples like this to really advocate for ourselves when it comes to speaking to representatives of the government and to Biden. I think that different communities, or all communities affected, and even those not affected, because it's important for allies to rise up to the cause. But I think it's important for everyone to really reach out to your representatives and let them know how the student debt is impacting you, and especially within your community. That way, it's something that they're constantly being faced. And I think that when you're constantly being told of what the issues are, at some point you have no other option than to face it and do something about it. After all, we do elect these people that are in office. So I think it's a tug of war. On the one end, the government wants to make sure that certain systems are at play so that they're getting the money that they need to acquire. But also on the other hand, we put them in office. So they have to find at least some sort of a medium to meet some of the needs of the people. Great question.
I think that's also a good point, because I've seen a lot of people say, well, if we can pause student loan repayment, then why can't we just cancel it altogether? Because if we can pause it, then it's capable of permanently pausing it. So that's something I've been seeing frequently as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that hasn't been addressed as it should be, because they don't want to. So I think another conversation is, how do you not force, but sort of force the government to see like this is something that should be done. Like if you can pause it, you can eliminate it. So where is the disconnect? So I think that's something that people should definitely be advocating for. I think there's power in working with the community within your own and also with others, because the more people that are involved in having these conversations and speaking to the representatives, the more power the conversations are, the more power the people have. The power resides within the people, because at the end of the day, those people that we elect them. So, just keep fighting the good fight.
So I'm going to give them another few seconds to submit your questions, or if you'd like to unmute and ask a question. But if that is all, then I want to thank Chikayla, for being here today and sharing this such an important topic. And thank you for joining and participating, for your time and energy and commitment to the Gender Justice Conference. We are going to now put up a QR code. So please consider filling out our evaluation, which will be sent to you via email. Please visit this QR code if you need to record your attendance at today's session for any reason. We hope you join us for our next session, a conversation with New York Times bestselling author Chloe Gong, as well as our keynote with Erica Hart at 6 p.m. And to learn more about those sessions, please visit our conference support hub. And thank you all so much for attending, and thank you again, Chikayla.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.